What's up, everyone? We are back. Jeremy and Jeff, the dynamic duo. How you doing today, Jeff?
My knuckles have turned to white. There's no turning back tonight, because this is Romans 5.
That's so good, and I'm gonna have to explain it because I get what you're doing there, but I don't know if anyone else will.
Yeah. Let's hear your explanation for what that was.
So this week, I was wondering where this was gonna go because this week Jeff asked me about my favorite band. And we were talking about, he got into music last week on the pod, Romans 4.
Mm-hmm.
Found out I wasn't a Dylan fan. I think Jeff's still harboring some secret grudge against me for that. But then he asked about my favorite band, who is Underoath. And that was Jeff's cover of an Underoath song. Sounds slightly different than they do it, but you got it in the ballpark, and you added Romans 5 in, which they don't do that, but you made it rhyme. So kudos to you. That was great. That was a great opener.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I've been on a real journey of discovery this week because, I would honestly just the day after we recorded last week, I was kind of upset at you for being so dismissive of Bob Dylan and thinking like, how can I convince Jeremy to get into Bob Dylan? Because it's good stuff. You don't know what you're missing. Maybe the more Christian thing to do is to seek more to understand than to be understood. So I thought instead of trying to move you over, I'll try to listen to some Underoath and see where you're coming from and see if I can gain a better understanding that way.
That's so Jesus-like of you.
Oh yeah, thank you.
So did it work? How did it affect you?
Yeah. Like I said, they held up better than I expected them to. It really brought me back to kind of my high school days of church basements, girl jeans, swoopy hair, that whole screamo scene. And I felt like, oh my gosh, this music is going to be as cringy as the kind of emo haircuts were back in the mid 2000s. But I don't know. Yeah, these guys, they're legit instrumentalists. They have a lot of passion, and I feel like in some ways maybe I'm more of an angry teenager now than I was back when I was a teenager. So maybe it resonates more with me at this stage in life.
You're catching up for lost time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think, just starting every episode off with you covering an Underoath song would be great.
Yeah, they've got a big catalog at this point. They've released
so many hits. Yeah.
4 albums since the last time I listened to them. So a lot of catching up to do.
They've changed a bit since then too. They're no longer Christians.
Yeah, it's true. I was looking into some interviews and kind of oral histories of Underoath videos as well. And yeah, it's interesting to see their journey because I'd heard people talk about that just on social media and stuff, but I wasn't really keeping up with it until this week when I was kind of going back to see what that was all about. So yeah, I related to their journey in a lot of ways, which was cool.
That's funny. Whenever, I was as a lead pastor, someone would say, "Oh, what's your favorite band?" I say, you probably won't like them. No, tell me, pastor. It's like, no, I don't think it's your style. And then if someone would push, I'm like, all right, it's this band called Underoath, we're going to go look it up. I'm like, I don't think you should. And then, they come back, that's angry music. Why are they so angry? And, for a while I'd be like, well, they're angry for Jesus, and then after a little bit of their journey, I'm like, yeah, they don't follow Jesus anymore. And yeah, now they cuss in their songs. But it was interesting. I did use them in a sermon one time. This is true. I wasn't planning on sharing this, but I didn't know you were going to cover Underoath.
Uh-huh.
I showed a video of there's 2 lead singers, one screams and one sings.
Yeah.
And they had this video talking about why they left Christianity. And I still remember one of the lines. Aaron, the singer who also plays drums, said, "If we were still Christian, or if I was still a Christian today, I would probably be dead." And just saying he had to, for his own growth and his own health mentally, get out of the church. And I showed that video in a sermon and just said, this is someone telling you their story who has been in the church and doesn't have a story of hope for it, doesn't have a story of how good it was. He's literally saying the community almost killed him, of just the judgment, all that. And so it was try to use it as a sobering moment for all of us of as a church community, we're capable of so much, either really good or really bad. And all thanks to Underoath making that point for us today.
Yeah, beautiful. We have a lot to get to here, Jeremy. Do you think we should maybe
nice.
jump into the episode?
Wow, look at that transition. Jeff getting us back. All right, Jeff, fine. We'll talk about Romans chapter 5.
I mean, we could talk about Underoath for an hour, but I mean, is this what the people came here to hear?
Maybe. How do you know? How do you know they're not here for the Underoath content?
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Write in, let us know.
Nonetheless, today we're going to talk about how Christians deal with disappointment, how God timed when to send Jesus, whether the resurrection literally happened, and just going to explore whether Paul still disagrees with my explanation on original sin that I've given previously. So before we get into Jeff's wonderful questions, I would like to set the tone for today with Romans chapter 5, verse 2. Paul's got some good news for us. Paul says, because of our faith, Christ has brought us into this place of undeserved privilege. There's a phrase for you. Where we now stand, and we confidently and joyfully look forward to sharing God's glory. Undeserved privilege, Jeff.
Yeah, check your undeserved privilege.
Love it. So good. And then right after that, he gets into the section that I'd like to ask you about, but I'm gonna share something first of my own experience lately. Verses 3-5, Paul says, we can rejoice too when we run into problems and trials, for we know that they help us develop endurance. And endurance develops strength of character, and character strengthens our confident hope of salvation, and this hope will not lead to disappointment. So Paul's making an argument here, a little logic equation. Problems and trials lead to endurance, which leads to character, which leads to confident hope in salvation and faith in who Jesus is. Now, I was thinking about, you and I, we have our problems and our trials, and some of them may be similar, some of them may be different. One of the things I've referenced throughout this podcast is that I post these clips each week, little bite-sized clips, usually like a minute, or less. And I get all sorts of comments from people that they're not listening or subscribing to the actual podcast. They're finding me randomly through the algorithm, on TikTok or YouTube or something. And so I just get these random comments. And anytime Jeff suggests we need to bring in someone really conservative onto the show, to balance our perspectives, I always just, usually pipe back of those guys are all over the web. They're everywhere. So Jeff, I want to let you in on some of my problems and trials. I'm going to give you 4. I just picked 4 this is from this week. Okay. This is not, I've been digging through archives of what I've been, told on the podcast. This is a week old, Jeff, from just last week. This is from Romans chapter 4 clips. Here's a few things that I've heard. Here are my problems and trials. One person said, yeah, that's the worst advice I've ever heard. How silly do you sound? Another person said, read the early church fathers. Another person said, try substantiating the claim of God and your beliefs before speaking on them. And my favorite, you deny God, putting God in a box. Bye.
Bye.
I got buyed. So, Jeff, that's a little bit of what I'm of my problems and trials, and hopefully they're creating endurance, which is going to create character, which is going to produce even more confident hope in this Jesus I have. But I was thinking, this is a little tongue in cheek, but I was thinking, is it possible that your current, I don't know what we want to call it, season, stage of life, era of being alive.
It's my emo phase. Let's be honest.
Whatever. Okay. Is it possible that you are currently on an epic journey into your own confident hope of salvation, and all of these problems and trials you have with Jesus right now are all just leading you down the road to endurance and character and confident hope? Could it be possible?
Yeah. Yes. Anything's possible. And I certainly like to think of myself as someone who's on a journey, because I feel like certainly with religion, but with all sorts of things, I feel totally undecided and not sure where I land on all kinds of issues. I'm hesitant to say that I've endured any kind of suffering or trials or tribulations, I would say, unless you can count like kind of existential emotional things like angst and disillusionment and those types of things, I suppose that's been the trials I've been through in terms of my thoughts on religion. But yeah, I haven't suffered physically at all, so I don't really want to complain too much about those kinds of things.
Paul doesn't say suffering in verse 3. He says problems and trials, Jeff. Just problems and trials. Which I think all of us at some level can go, yeah, I got problems. I got trials. I got things I'm working on, right? It doesn't matter, your walk of life or what you believe or everybody, has got problems, trials. So I don't know. It just made me think that's something we all have in common when we, look at this. But I suppose they don't. I suppose not everyone would agree that they're going to produce endurance and character and confident hope, right? Like that would be the part that you'd say, yeah, maybe trials don't lead to that.
I think they certainly can, like the adage, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I mean, I agree with the sentiment that by thinking about these things, and like pushing back on things I disagree with, ideally that will make me a stronger, hopefully smarter, more thoughtful person than if I just kind of passively just consume whatever is fed to me. So yeah, hopefully I'm getting stronger. I don't know where I'm going to end up, if I'm going to become a stronger Christian by coming back to Christianity at the end of all this, or if we'll end up somewhere else, who's to say. But hopefully I'll be a big strong beefcake wherever I end up.
Nice. Do you get angry comments when you post video clips from this podcast, or is that just me?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit. I got one where I was like complaining about Paul being misogynistic, and someone said like only weak men would call Paul a misogynist or dismiss him for having like a dated worldview, something like that. And I kind of clap back on that by saying like, yeah, I'm a weak person, but I rejoice in my weakness, because when I'm weak, I'm strong. Because that's a quote from Paul. If you're gonna play in the social media space, you have to deal with the trolls, right? That's part of the package for sure.
Yeah, it does come with the territory.
Yeah,
and it's good for views.
It is, yeah. It's a little bit of the poison chalice of like I'd give anything for more engagement on this platform. Yeah, including
if you get the engagement you want, it will for sure bring the haters.
Yeah,
as part of that engagement.
Be careful what you wish for. All right. Well, I have a question for you that's regarding this same passage, specifically in verse 5, when it says, "This hope will not lead to disappointment, for we know how dearly God loves us, because he has given us the Holy Spirit to fill our hearts with love." This is something I've been thinking about for just forever, and I've wanted to ask you about it. And I feel like this is the closest I've found to a Bible verse that kind of talks about this idea that we hear about all the time in Christianity of fulfillment through Christ, or like, nothing else satisfies in this life, but only Jesus can fulfill you. This idea of being filled with the Holy Spirit, and I hope that it doesn't disappoint. And it reminds me of, speaking of social media, a post I did for, it was originally going to be for the Forest and Trees account, but I ended up connecting it to my own personal Instagram account, and then it ended up on my own personal Facebook account, because it felt like I was kind of talking about more of my personal thinky pain struggles, like we were just talking about. And I got a lot of comments from people on Facebook, like old friends from Bible college who I haven't talked to in like 10 years, who are like, "Hey man, do you want to grab coffee? Like, let me explain to you how Christianity is not so bad," and all these things. Which they were all very kind. Just to be clear, everyone was nice and chill about it. No one. There was only one person who kind of accused me of like, "Well, maybe you did it wrong," and that person literally texted me before commenting. Like, he texted me and said, "Hey Jeff, is it okay if I comment on your Facebook post?
Is it okay if I slam you publicly?"
Yeah, and I gave him the go ahead. So as far as internet trolls go, that's as polite as it gets. Christians are always talking about this, right? Like, only God and the Holy Spirit can fulfill you, and like as Paul says, this hope will not disappoint. But I wonder, like, what would you say to someone who does feel those feelings of emptiness, who does feel disappointed, even though theoretically they're supposed to feel fulfilled and filled with the Holy Spirit?
I would say, welcome. You're in good company. I think this is one of those kind of like side effects of how the prosperity gospel has bled into the way we understand a lot of Christianity of, if you have the right faith and you're the right kind of Christian, you'll be healthy, wealthy, and wise, and your kids will have straight A's and be, great. And we just kind of assume like if you're doing it right, like things should work out. And I think that's garbage theology in so many ways. And I just think just logically, Jesus was disappointed too. I mean, you find this all throughout the Gospels. I think even in like Gethsemane, when he's like just asking them, just, hey, can you guys just stay awake with me? Like, I got something really heavy coming up. I'd rather not be alone. And like they're all falling asleep repeatedly on him, just like disappointment. Like, oh, okay, I'm gonna have to do this alone. Like you guys are just too tired. So there's just like examples like that where you just go, oh no, Jesus felt disappointment too. But I think if you ask the flip side, like, okay, what would it be like if we didn't have any disappointment in life? If the moment you became a Christian, it truly was there, you have no more disappointment. I would say you would not be living on earth anymore. Like you would not be in this thing that we call life, because you'd be experiencing something wholly other than life as we know it. And I would say, yeah, that's going to happen in heaven. Like Jesus will redeem all things, and every disappointment we have at that point will be redeemed into something greater. But shy of that, that's not what this life is. And I don't think Jesus ever promised us otherwise. And this is where I think people somehow elevate Paul above Jesus of like, no, but Paul said, it's like, yeah, well, keep this in mind of things that Jesus said. And let's put it all into perspective, right? And so Jesus says in John 16:33, I have told you all this so that you may have peace in me. That's good. Okay, we're going to have peace. Here on earth, you're going to have many trials and sorrows, but take heart, I have overcome the world. Like, look, you're going to have a peace. And I would say peace, you can have that in the midst of a trial, in the midst of a disappointment. You can still have that peace. But, you're going to have that. And that's to be expected, right, when we follow Jesus. And I love something that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said. I think this is so good. He said, we must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope. We must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope. And I think that is what it means to be Christian, is to say, I'm going to experience disappointment. I'm going to have things that don't make sense to me. And I would say anyone who has followed Jesus and is willing to be honest with you will have a disappointment story of, I can't explain this. This didn't, I asked for this healing. I prayed this prayer and didn't get the answer. There's just so many of these. And to somehow create a Christianity that absolves you of that is not Christianity. I think we go back to Jesus and just like, yeah, you're going to have this. You're going to experience this, but take heart. I've overcome this. And ultimately we put our hope in Jesus. And that's how you carry your disappointment. You carry it in this suitcase of hope, if you will. And I think that's the Christian response to something that, Christian or not, you're going to experience.
Yeah, that's beautifully stated. I guess I would ask, so this thing I'm talking about that Paul is talking about, of just this feeling of fulfillment through the Holy Spirit, or like the joy, like one of the fruits of the Spirit is joy. Is that sort of a myth, or is that something that's like not guaranteed for all believers? Like, isn't that supposed to be evidence that you have the Holy Spirit in you if you are filled with joy, for example?
Well, I would say it's definitely, it is a fruit of the Spirit, right? So it is something that you would hope to be evident, but, so is patience. And I know a lot of Christians who I would describe as very impatient people. And so I wouldn't say you don't have Jesus. I would just say that fruit of the Spirit may not be as evident in your life. And, the goal of all those are not things you just snap your fingers and you say, I'm now going to be a joyful person today. Like, that's not how this works. What I think you do is you say, hey, Jesus, this is something I'm not naturally good at. Like, maybe I'm not a joyful person. I don't experience a lot of joy. And then that becomes an area where you invite Jesus, say, hey, could you make me more joyful? Could your Spirit allow and produce more joy in my life? And that could be, an area where you invite God to move in your life. And if you're that person on the flip side, you're like, I'm not a patient person, I'm very impatient, I would say, let that be a prayer that you have then, of like, God, this is a fruit of the Spirit. It's lacking in my life. I want to, I want to have more evidence in my life. And all of us could look at that list and go, yeah, that's the one for me that I'm just not really good at. And so I think if the person is saying, hey, I just don't feel a ton of joy, I would say there's nothing inherently wrong with that. That might be the one for you that, just really seek God in that and ask God to transform that area. And I also think some of that's temperament. I think there are people who walk around and they've perpetually got a smile on their face. And there's other people who have, RBF, if you know what that stands for. And, and that's just their demeanor, right? It's like the way their face is. And so I think some of it is, you may compare yourself to like someone who's naturally chipper and joyful all the time and go, well, I don't have that. Something's wrong with me. It's like, well, you may not be wired like that person, and joy might look different to you. And, I would say I'm not the bubbly joy person, but I also don't think that it means I haven't experienced joy. I just don't necessarily experience it the way some other people do.
Do you think that Christians in general should feel differently from non-Christians? Should there be some evidence of the Holy Spirit in some way, or would you say not necessarily? Is it possible to be a Christian your whole life, to pray for joy, for example, your whole life and never get it? And is that a reasonable expectation?
That's a great question. I would say yeah, because God doesn't work on formulas, so there's no guarantee of anything. So you could pray your whole life for joy, and for whatever reason, God might not answer that prayer the way you want it to be answered. To your other part of that question, I would say, yeah, if you are a Christian, there should be something noticeably different in your life. And that should be the result of the Holy Spirit. And if the Holy Spirit is real, which I believe the Holy Spirit is real, and the Holy Spirit has character traits a la fruits of the Spirit, then yes, a person who's living in submission to what the Holy Spirit is trying to do should look differently than that person would look if they were an atheist. Like, that is just a logical, equation. Now, if you look and go, well, Christians aren't really looking different, I would say, yeah, that is a problem in Christianity today. But that goes back to I think it was Tolstoy's, the drunk walk down the right road, right? It's like the road is still the road, but there's far too many Christians walking it, swerving from side to side, to go back to a previous episode's analogy. But I think you still pray. And again, to me these days, Christianity has gotten way simpler in the sense of it's not about believing the right things or having the right ideas on X, Y, and Z, as if we'll even know what that is. I obviously spend time exploring that. It's what we do here. But ultimately, it's looking more like Jesus, submitting your life to him and looking more like him. And the fruit of the Spirit's a great way to measure that. Are these things evident in my life? If not, where can I invite Jesus to transform me? And if you don't feel joy, I would say that should be a prayer of yours. Hey, God, this is something I'm recognizing as a fruit of your Spirit. I'm not really feeling it. I would like to experience more of that. But I could also tell you there's plenty of things I've prayed for and God's never answered. And you just go, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. It's interesting. As I'm thinking about my kind of emotional state before and after being Christian, I would say I definitely don't feel any better now necessarily, but I don't feel worse either. I've seen a lot of stories of people who leave Christianity and they feel so much better. I would say the one advantage I've experienced is I do feel kind of the relief of being able to be honest with people, because I feel like I went through a long stage of kind of still being in the Christian circles and having to kind of pretend that I believe things or go along with things and just kind of smile and nod through a lot of stuff. So that is a huge relief, just to be honest, like Jesus says, the truth will set you free. That's a good feeling. But other than that, I don't know. I felt like I had these feelings of emptiness in Christianity, and now I still have them outside. So,
right.
Just personal anecdote there.
No, I appreciate that.
Maybe we should zoom out and talk about the history of human civilization.
Wow, okay. Let's zoom way out.
Yeah. Let's get out of this personal depths of my own soul stuff. This is what the people came for. So verse 6 says, when we were utterly helpless, Christ came at just the right time and died for us sinners. So this reminds me of something that I can't remember where I've heard it, but I've heard a handful of apologists or theologians talk about this idea of God's timing, right? When it comes to why did God send Jesus right at the year 0, 2,000 years ago? And I've heard people make the argument of like this was the perfect timing from God's perspective because it was like if you send someone at this point in Jerusalem, they can start a movement that will spread throughout the world or something like that. I don't know. It seems like a weird claim to me the more I think about it because it's been 2,000 years at this point. I mean, Christianity has been an impressive social movement in that it's 1/3 of a global population is Christian currently. But you would think if it was like the perfect timing, they would have spread completely. They would have finished the job by now, right? And the whole world would be Christianized. So it also made me think like, I don't know, the time it was sent, there was no, obviously, cameras. There was no opportunity for video footage. Like if Jesus would have come and the resurrection would have happened in the modern day, we could have spread the news much quicker. Or he could have come much, much earlier when the global population was just 2 people, for example. He could have just sent Jesus right after Adam and Eve sinned, or right when the Tower of Babel or when the flood was going to happen, something like that. Kind of a highfalutin theoretical question here, Jeremy. What's your understanding of God's timing when it comes to sending Jesus for his earthly ministry?
So, it depends on what's the criteria we're using to determine whether it was the right timing or the wrong timing, right? If the assumption is Jesus coming at the right time means the whole world will be saved, in the sense of everyone will profess to be, a Christian, then I would say, yeah, you'd have to argue it hasn't worked in 2,000 years then, right? And if that was your goal, if everyone needed to see Jesus and say yes, then yeah, I would definitely send Jesus earlier when the population's smaller and you have more of a chance to have everybody influenced, or later when you can record it on YouTube and cast it, out. But even then, just like everything else, you would have a very split reaction to even footage of Jesus today. And so I think I would take that criteria off the table and say, I don't think that's the criteria God used. And I don't think that's the criteria Paul's referencing when he says at just the right time. I think of this more in light of progressive revelation. So this is something we've talked about. Okay, so if you're God, so from God's point of view, at what point can I show people what I'm really like? That's, I think, the right time that God is considering, that Paul's referencing here, not to have everybody say yes to me, because I don't know that's ever going to happen. So to me, when Jesus came was the right time for them to be ready enough to go, oh, this is what God looks like. And, I think there were certain conditions that God wanted to be met to be able to display who God really is. And that point in history, was the perfect moment for God to say, all right, now's the time I can reveal who I am. So I would understand what Paul is saying here in light of progressive revelation. It is God saying, you're ready now. I can show you. And from that point of view, you want that to be as early as you can. Like you want to show what you're really like as fast as you can. And so again, if we look at it from that point of view, you wouldn't want it to have waited till now, because that would have been another 2,000 years, people not knowing that God looks like Jesus. And then you would say, well, why didn't he come 1,000 years before that? And well, they weren't ready. They wouldn't have been able to understand it. They, it wouldn't have made any sense to them. And so I think that's what Paul's saying in light of what God is trying to reveal all throughout history, which is this journey the Old Testament tries to bring us along, is that God ultimately looks like Jesus. And at just the right time, God was able to reveal that in the physical body of, Jesus as he was born and walked and lived and died.
That's interesting. So it makes me think of kind of the ethics of Jesus' teaching. Like I get how his ethics about like love your enemy and stuff like that are very radical in the way that he like challenges the status quo by hanging out with sinners and stuff. Like in some ways it wasn't as much ahead of its time in terms of like he didn't say to set the slaves free and things like that. So I don't know. Couldn't that have been some more like that would have been like really impressive timing from my perspective if Jesus would have come and had all of these like broken more of these social taboos from back in the day that would have like really challenged people. Do you know what I mean?
Yes and no. I understand the point you're making, but I think again, in that culture, you can't set the slaves free. They're not ready to hear that message. That wouldn't have sunk in. Obviously, it didn't sink in for many, many years to come before that, would be an idea that people go, yeah, that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the ethics of Jesus absolutely undermine slavery. So yeah, I think Jesus did come and set that in place. But Jesus didn't come to reform Rome. He didn't come, to say, hey, we're going to get better Roman laws on the books to try to, set this country right. It's like, no, he was coming to do something totally other, and that other has continued today, and I think continues into the future. And that's the point. We are a part of this othering of what is God doing, and it is other than America, and it is other than any other government in this world, and we're getting invited into this movement that then I take anything in my culture and I compare it to this, and I go, hey, what doesn't make sense anymore? And so, yeah, I would say Jesus started all that and got all that rolling, but he did it within Rome of the time, of which there were tons of cultural restraints. But I think you look at the way he empowered women, the way he, and even the early church do have this thing, this anti-slavery, ridge going through it, which sadly was hijacked by a lot of slavers in America who said, no, we're going to read over this and make it say what we want it to say and actually use the Bible to support slavery. I would say the actual ethics is the opposite of that. And yeah, again, it's one of those things. You can make the Bible say whatever you want the Bible to say if, you just want to take certain parts out of context, and it happens all the time. But it doesn't change. I think this was God saying, this is what I'm really like. You're ready to see it now. And once you see this, this will start a chain, of all sorts of effects that will continue on until Jesus comes back. And I think we're a part of that same domino effect today.
So I get that the society wasn't ready for it. They never would have accepted it. But again, wasn't that kind of the point of Jesus's ministry? Was his ideas were so radical that they killed him for it. So why couldn't he have thrown that one in there as well?
I don't know, Jeff. I'm not Jesus.
Okay. Oh, well, that's disappointing.
I don't have an answer as to why he didn't say other things he didn't say.
Does that sound familiar to you? Do you feel like you've heard that argument before of
sure,
Jesus' timing was perfect in terms of within the scale of human civilization?
Right. And I would agree with you in shooting that down of, it didn't work.
Yeah.
You timed it wrong. Why is not everybody Christian today? Or how long would that perfect time work for that to be everybody, right? But again, I don't think that's the goal. I don't think that's the logic Paul's even using. I think it's more from God's point of view saying, all right, now's the time. Now you can see it. And again, I would compare it to a parent saying, all right, now it's time to have the sex talk, or whatever milestone with your kid. It's now you're ready for this. I've determined you're ready. So now we're going to have a different experience. But one of the things that I've done with my kids is when they turn 13, they get to watch their first rated R movie with me. And it's the movie Tombstone. And it's my favorite movie of all time. So they add it to Underoath, my all-time favorite movie.
Wow.
And it's this special, again, I think it's a pretty tame R-rated movie, especially in light of what's out there today. But it's a milestone of you're 13, you're old enough now. And, I've done it with one of my kids, and I have another kid in a couple months about to turn 13, and he's already pumped. He's ready to, we're going to watch this movie. And it's a little rite of passage. And so I think it's more from that kind of a lens of all right, you are now ready for something. It's almost like humanity came of age. And God's now I get to show you something that you're ready for. We're going to have an adult conversation here. You weren't ready before.
Do you have a special Jeremy edit of Tombstone where they all become pacifists at the end and lay their weapons down?
No Jeremy edit. No, I have to acknowledge, and I can acknowledge this, and I explain this to my boys. Most entertainment, movies, music, books, fictional stories, they involve revenge narratives. I mean, there's no way to remove that. It is a cultural thirst we have of the bad guys getting what is coming to them because the good guys are going to give it to them. Right. And so I just say that's part of humanity. We desire this. We crave it. And so, I try to teach my kids hey, you can watch this in a movie, but understand we don't own guns in this house. We're not going to go be Wyatt Earp. We're not going to be Doc Holliday. So we can watch it and hopefully separate. That's a movie. And, that's something we can enjoy Val Kilmer and his stunning performance of Doc Holliday.
I'm your Huckleberry.
One of the greatest of all time. And enjoy that experience, and yet also have the conversation of, that's a fun story to watch in a movie. That's not the way God works. It's not the way that ultimately, healing happens. And even like they'll watch something, a Marvel movie or something about war or whatever. And it's like, I have to like remind them like, hey, just a reminder, like war is actually horrific. And any of these movies that depict it as this awesome, thing to go experience, like talk to people who've actually been to war and you hear a very different story.
Yeah. Don't take your guns to town, son. As Johnny Cash would say. Have you seen the movie Pig?
It's my pig.
The Nicolas Cage movie?
I'm not a big Nicolas Cage guy.
Where's
you?
my pig? Oh yeah, he's the greatest.
Oh gosh. Now we've gone off the rails.
The star of Left Behind, Jeremy? Are you kidding me?
Oh man, I thought that was Kirk Cameron.
No, the reboot was Nick Cage. But okay, this is my recommendation for you. You should check out the movie Pig, because this fulfills my kind of thirst for like, why can't we have like a non-violent style revenge movie? And that's like what this movie is about, which is kind of a spoiler, but that's the only way I can get you to check it out. So that's my recommendation.
Pig. The movie is just called Pig.
It's my pig.
I've never even heard of this.
It's pretty recent. It came out just a couple years ago.
All right, I gotta go watch it now.
It's a great movie. I love it. Yeah.
What's it rated? Is it appropriate for kids or no?
I think it's probably rated R. Yeah. I don't know. It's an adult movie. Like kids would probably think it's boring.
Good.
Because it's a thinker, man. It's an intellectual journey.
Wow. With Nicolas Cage. Okay.
Yeah, with Nick Cage. Yeah.
I hope we get a bunch of listener feedback on this movie.
Yeah, if you've seen Pig, write in. Let us know what you think.
Is Jeff out to lunch, or is it the greatest?
I'd love to hear people's feedback on my movie recommendations. Let's rewind to the beginning of human civilization now and talk about
back in.
Yeah, talk about Adam and Eve. Verse 14 says, "Now Adam is a symbol, a representation of Christ." And so this is interesting because the whole second half of this chapter basically is talking about Adam's sin, like ruined it for all of us, and then Jesus had to come and redeem us, kind of thing. Full disclosure, I realize I'm sort of taking it out of context here, but it just made me think about the idea. So Adam is a symbol. It made me think of this concept that a lot of more progressive Christians are more familiar with, of like there probably wasn't a literal Adam and Eve. I was in that camp for many years. I was a non-young Earth. I do believe in evolution, so I don't believe there was like a literal Adam and Eve, Garden of Eden kind of thing. Which makes me wonder, like, what was Paul's view? Because Paul seems to be taking it pretty literally here, saying like Adam's sin caused death to fall on all of the world. And anyway, so then it made me think, well, how far can we push it? Because this is a big discussion within Christianity, like what's literal, what's metaphor. And it made me think, okay, so I'm guessing you would agree, you don't need to believe in a literal Adam and Eve to be a good Christian. Can you believe in that the resurrection was non-literal? Because this is something I've heard more progressive Christians say, that Jesus didn't literally rise from the dead. He metaphorically rose from the dead and defeated sin and death in some poetic, metaphorical way or whatever. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's interesting that I think Paul is opening the door here to not believe in Adam literally. So I just think that's an interesting,
so I'm not taking it out of context. Nice.
I don't think, well, you're taking it in a direction Paul is not taking it, asking about Jesus.
That's true.
But I'll grant you, you're a co-host on this. You can take it wherever you want to go. So yeah, I'm all for not taking much of the Old Testament literally. Like I think if you just release the need to make everything literal in the Old Testament, it'll make so much more sense. And if you're hearing that and you're like, I cannot believe the pastor just said that. You know what pushed me to that was studying the Bible in seminary and going deeper and deeper. And in my master's program and realizing that people who spend their entire life studying and writing and researching and, nuancing all this, they're some of the ones that are the most, the strongest proponents of this is not a literal story. This is, a figurative image here or metaphor. And, you get into this and you go, oh, okay, so it's just one view that this is all literal. I do not think the Adam and Eve story is a literal story. I don't think the flood story is a literal story. I think these are ancient Near East, stories about how did we get here. And then I think years later, in the Babylonian captivity, the Israelites finally wrote all this stuff down long after Moses, long after all these events happened. And they took all the stories that they had inherited and they weaved them together with their understanding of God and then pointed it, of this is how our God takes these stories and make them unique. So I have no problem with that, but it means I don't need to take a lot of these stories literally. However, I would say by the time you get to the New Testament, you're in a different era and a different genre. And I would say you do not have to make the argument, either all the Bible has to be literally true or none of it is literally true. Like that's a really bad way to read the Bible. I think it's Brian Zahn was the first person I heard say this, but like, think about the Old Testament as based on true events. There are things that happened in the Old Testament that are historically provable. There's also a ton that's not. And you've got this
kind of like Tombstone, right? Just heavily embellished.
I'm your huckleberry.
You know what? That's actually a great. I like that. I'm gonna take that. That is a great metaphor because I love Tombstone, and I love that story. And I've read. I live in Arizona. I'm a couple hours away from Tucson. I grew. This is like home for me, right? So I just have always been fascinated by like Tombstone, the Wild West, is like literally where I'm from. But if you read the books on it, which I have, a lot of the way Tombstone, the movie, depicts it is not accurate. And that's fine. They keep enough of the story, that you go, yeah, I understand the gist of it. The Bible, especially the Old Testament, is a lot like that, where it's like, yeah, there's enough of the main plots, right? Where you go, okay, this happened. But a lot of it, they're storytellers. And I think they're brilliant storytellers trying to tell about a different God that they have experienced and using all these stories. And again, the Israelites weren't the only people that had a flood narrative. And it's like you start reading all these and go, oh, other ancient Near East cultures talked about a flood. Like this was a common thing. And I don't even think the flood was worldwide. I think it was a regional flood. I mean, it's like you start getting into all these things and you just go, oh, it's not, the walls of Jericho, I don't think are literal. And the whole Canaanite conquest, like there's so many things that if you study it, you get into lots of issues where scholars will say, yeah, this probably didn't literally happen. However, I think if you apply that same thing to the life of Jesus, you irreparably lose Christianity. And I don't think you have to do this at all. I think you can read the Old Testament for what it is. It is a very different kind of document than what the New Testament is. Totally different style of writing for most of it. Very different way of recording it than the Old Testament was written down. I think if you, this is again just my take. If you, as a Christian, say, I don't think that the resurrection has to be literally true, I think you've lost something essential to Christianity. And so I'm all for looking at the Old Testament going, yeah, parts of it are not literally true. I think you need to, as a Christian, say the resurrection literally happened. Jesus literally walked, literally, was alive, was killed by Rome and literally came back to life and all of that. And one of the best books, if you're going, I just don't know if I could get there. One of the best books that I've read on it that I think does a great job is Andy Stanley wrote a book called Irresistible that basically figures out how did we get to the Christianity we have today, if this didn't really happen. And I think he makes a really compelling case of like, if none of this happened, you wouldn't have Christianity play out the way it did. And again, it's not going to convince everybody. It certainly is a compelling book to me to go, yeah, I think this makes a lot of sense. I ended up, when I was a lead pastor, I preached on this book, not even thinking much about it. Like, because if in the church world, Andy Stanley is pretty middle of the road. He's not considered a progressive. He's not as conservative as they come, but he's by no means cutting edge on theology. But I got lit up for doing that book, and he got lit up for writing this book. And I mean, literally, people left our church over this, and I was so surprised by that. But the reason they left is because they felt like if you understand Stanley's argument in Irresistible, then it elevates Jesus so far beyond what the Old Testament is that it discredits the Old Testament. And it goes back to, I can believe this is literal and not believe that the Old Testament's literal. And this book really helps you navigate that. And that was I had one guy in our church, the guy was incredible and, super, super volunteer and all this. And he just said, Jeremy, I love the Old Testament. I read the Old Testament every day. I just love it. And I can't be a part of a church that isn't just going to celebrate the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. And I remember that was just such a weird comment to me. Like I just had never, I know, I can think of like my seminary professors that taught Old Testament courses were probably some of the most Old Testament obsessed Christians that I had ever met, right? Like they just loved, I teach Exodus 5 times a year. It's my favorite book of the Bible. It's like, okay, well, you're a Christian, but you love this. But to meet a Christian that literally is obsessed with the Old Testament after seeing Jesus, I'm like, I don't understand that. But I think that there are people that love the Old Testament, and I love the Old Testament as it helps me understand Jesus because I definitely elevate Jesus. So I think, again, my take would be you can navigate much of the Old Testament and not have it literal, but I don't think you want to do that with the person of Jesus.
Wow, the Theo Bros are cheering right now, Jeremy.
I feel
like this is kind of a first for a podcast because normally I come in, with my liberal postmodern garbage and say like, "Are you sure we need to keep this stuff in the Bible? Can't we just throw this out?" And I feel like this might be the first time when you've really held your ground and said, "Nope, this is a foundational thing. You need to keep this one." So that's interesting.
Yeah, and again, I don't know. I think you lose too much if you made this optional. I think you lose too much of the essence of, because again, to me, Christianity is Jesus. It's not all these things you believe and all these interpretations. It's what Jesus did, what he accomplished, and the story that launched Christianity. And that's Andy Stanley's argument in Irresistible. The first sermons were all just stories. Let me tell you what Jesus did.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's how Christianity grew. They just told that story over and over and over and over again. And people went, really? That was God? Like, oh, we heard that. And like, oh, and then like, that's what, and then over time we stopped thinking that the story was the important part. And now it's all these beliefs that we have. And I think, no, it's the story. It's the person of Jesus and what he's done.
It's kind of interesting because I haven't, like, when I was a Christian, I never struggled with believing in the resurrection or the miracles of Jesus or anything. I always thought just, it seemed like I knew there was the debate between like whether the resurrection literally happened as a historical event or not. So I was aware of that, but it always felt like, well, the jury's out. You can't really prove or disprove it because it was so long ago. So I was always willing to accept that. And for me, it was sort of like, so I can believe in Jesus' miracles, but like, why are there no miracles today? It was kind of like a stumbling block for me where it felt like, if Jesus did these miracles, he said his followers could do the miracles. I don't see that happening, and all the miracle cases seem like highly disputed and not as concrete as they were in Bible times. Something I referenced many episodes ago with Philip Goff. He did a podcast about secular Christianity where he said like he identifies as a Christian, but he doesn't really believe in God or believe in any kind of miraculous stuff. But it just, I don't know if it's just the tradition, the teachings, the kind of the if you just make everything a metaphor, I suppose. So that just kind of brings up an interesting question of like, who, where does the gatekeeping start of like who is allowed to be a Christian? Is everyone who identifies as a Christian, or do you say if you don't believe in the resurrection, you're not a real Christian?
Well, I don't think we are the gatekeepers. So I don't spend any time I don't feel like the need to tell anyone if they're a Christian or not a Christian. I just point back to Jesus and go, yeah, I think this is important. I think it's an essential part of what I believe. And if someone say, well, I'm a Christian, I don't believe it, I would say, okay. It's like, all right. If you're asking me, I would say you should believe that. Like that part's important. If you don't want to believe it, okay.
You had the Theo Bros support and then you just lost it, Jeremy.
Yeah, I did. Dang it. You did. You couldn't just let me have them. You had to keep asking a follow-up till I gave in.
Well, unless you're a Theo Bro who's a non-gatekeeper, we welcome you as well. That's You're always welcome here. That's great. All right, so let's finish this chapter off with some more talk about Adam's sin, Christ's redemption. Verse 18 says, "Yes, Adam's one sin brings condemnation for everyone, but Christ's one act of righteousness brings a right relationship with God and new life for everyone." So I was in a little bit of a pickle here because I feel like we already talked about original sin a couple episodes ago, and you stated your position very clearly. I like what you had to say there, but I feel like this chapter, so much of it is about original sin once again. And so I was trying to think of how can I push back, because I really feel like Paul is arguing that original sin is a thing here, or at least like the curse of death or whatever. And then we got a question from one of our followers on Instagram, Greg Clute. So thank you for writing in, Greg. And he was just asking a lot of questions about this pond scum theology we talked about in chapter 3. So he had kind of a series of questions. I'll just read them here and you can respond to those. Since we were born in God's image, does that mean we were born perfect like Jesus was? Are we perfect until we commit our first sin? And after we become imperfect by sinning, do we still bear God's image? So what do you think about those questions in light of the end of chapter 5 here?
Yeah, they're good questions. And, I like the challenge of, okay, is Paul really just banging on this drum? What's going on here? Okay, so let's just talk. All right, so he keeps talking about Adam, sin. What about Eve?
Yeah. I was wondering that too.
Why no mention of Eve? Isn't that interesting? Because as I recall in the text, she ate it first, then gave it to Adam, who was with her, and they had, a little illicit meal together. But there's no mention of Eve. It's just Adam. What's going on here? I remember I was on this is, 20 years ago now, but mission trip to Nepal. And I remember we went to this Bible college in Nepal. And so if you know, Nepal is a Hindu country. Christianity was such a minority. So there's this little pocket of Christians, in Nepal, at least at that point. And there's this little college they were trying to like raise up, people for ministry in Nepal. And I remember there was these students there, and like these guys and these girls, and they were, if I recall, they were like not sitting together. And I remember one of the girls asked us, how do we as Christians like have a positive self-esteem since we're women, and Eve was the one that made the sin. I remember like I was confused by the question, like what? Like I just didn't understand. And I didn't know if someone was getting lost in translation or whatever. And then like literally the people were like, yeah, she's saying that they basically internalize original sin as women because Eve was the one that sinned. And I just said, that's really interesting. I said, that's not the way that like Christians in America read this story. And I said, I think people don't just blame Eve. And I said, if you read the text, Adam's with her while she does this, and Adam sins too. All that to say, I think it's worth noting, Paul's not talking about Eve, so he's not retelling the story here. He's doing something, I would say, artistic. Now, I would say the closest I'll agree to original sin is that sin always has effects on others, especially when we normalize it. So Adam and Eve sinning, which again, I don't think Adam and Eve are real people, so just remind you all that. Adam and Eve sinning, right? Then their kids see that. Then, that there is something to that. That's not original sin, meaning we inherit your sin by default. But I think if I decide in my life, hey, I'm going to normalize some sin, I'm increasing the chances that my kids will do that sin because they're going to see it. It's going to be modeled for them, right? That is an element of sin. But I think we got to ask here, is Paul literally explaining things the way things were? Or is he using imagery to make a bigger point? And I would say the big aha that he's using imagery is the fact that Eve is never mentioned. He's not retelling the story. He's using imagery to make a bigger point. And the bigger point, I would suggest, is not about Adam. The bigger point is about Jesus. He's just using Adam to try to set up artistically, as a storyteller does, who Jesus is. And so, the point is like verse 18. Christ's one act of righteousness brings a right relationship with God and new life for everyone. That's the so what. What Christ did is the point of Paul's story, not what Adam did. Adam's just used as a compare and contrast to try to set up, who Jesus is and what Jesus is doing. That is the way I interpret what Paul's doing here. He's not retelling actual events. Now, to Greg's question, well, how do we define perfect? What does that mean? I would say every human is born with free will and the capability to sin. Like, we're made in the image of God, but we have free will. We have this ability. The chances of never choosing sin are not high. Okay, so the odds of someone being born and that person never chooses anything sinful, right? And theologically, I would say only Jesus ever chose that path. Like, he's the only human that decided, I'm going to always choose others or, what God is asking. But I would say we are made in God's image. And the more we live according to our design, the more we will relate to Jesus, because that's what we were designed to be like. We say a phrase a lot that I think we say it in the opposite way it should be. We'll say, well, I'm only human. And we usually say that to defend a shortcoming. Well, I'm sorry I did that. I'm only human, right? And we say like, well, what do you expect from me? I'm only human should be, I'm made in the image of God. I'm only human. That's why I should be able to move beyond what I'm currently doing, right? And this whole idea of being image bearer of God is actually very fascinating. And I think when we read the Old Testament stories, a lot of times we don't understand what they meant by it. So for example, when they talk about so Moses comes down the mountain and Aaron's got the golden calf and they're all worshiping the golden calf. We read that story today and we're like, what idiots. They thought this golden calf they made was a god. Like, they just made it. That's the dumbest thing ever. How do they think that's a god? They didn't think the golden calf was a god. They thought the golden calf was made in the image of a god that would indwell upon it once it was created. So this is how image of God existed in the Old Testament. Whatever item they made, they didn't think the item itself was God. They thought if it was made in that God's image, that God could come down from heaven and dwell inside of it. That is the same image that they have, these Hebrew writers, of what we are. We are literally image bearers. That God can come down and dwell inside of us. And that's what God wants to do. And all we have to do is choose that, is say yes to that. So that is always the tension. God always wants that to be true. So one sin doesn't disqualify me. It just means I'm living contrary to what is inside of me, what is trying to get me to live differently. And so it's almost like I become blurry for a moment, because it's like, well, that was confusing. You were supposed to look like this, but you look like that. Like that image got distorted. And it's just a chance to go, no, I have the Spirit of God in me. That is my default setting now. Like, the Spirit should be able to shape me. And so I don't think perfection and the image of God, should be tied of like, you either have it or you don't. No, we're designed to be image bearers. Even when we sin, we still model for us. And what is so shocking about Jesus, and we've talked about this on a lot of episodes, is that Jesus is willing to assume our sin onto him, to stoop down to meet us where we are. And that gives us such hope of like, oh, this is the kind of God that we are imaging today. So I don't know if that fully answers Greg's question, but I think you can make sense of all of it. But thinking of us as perfect or not perfect is probably not the easiest way to make sense of it.
So Greg's question, as I understood it, was he saying like, do you basically like start perfect? Like a newborn baby would be perfectly righteous. Like newborn babies on the same level as baby Jesus, but just as soon as that newborn baby commits their first sin, then they're a wretched sinner deserving of punishment. That was kind of how I understood.
But I'm saying, go back to, what does it mean to be perfect? Does perfect just mean you haven't sinned? Like, so it depends on how you're even defining these words. I don't think that's a helpful way of understanding what it means to be human. So yeah, a baby, I would say technically, I don't think has any sin till the baby sins.
Right.
So that's the way I would understand it. But it doesn't mean the baby was perfect to begin with, because I think that's a weird way of understanding it. Again, there's
perfect
only...
as in just morally perfect, not like physically perfect or anything.
Right, but I'm saying, because there's only been one morally perfect human, I don't think it's necessarily a helpful way of understanding who we are called to be then. Because then it just feels like, oh, I started off great and then I lost it. I blew it. And the other thing kind of reminds me of,
you had one job to do.
Right. I remember when we have 5 kids. Our oldest, was our first, and we're learning everything. And, when you have one kid only, you do everything by the book and it's all the right way. And I remember there was like this, like, I don't know how many months we kept it going, but like he had only had like organic, good baby food and formula and breast milk, and like everything that had ever gone into his body was healthy and good. And like, I remember literally the first time we gave him like a brownie. We were at a party and I was eating a brownie. He's a little baby and he's just eyeing me. And I'm like, I'll give him a little piece of this brownie, And so I literally break off a little piece and he just pukes it up everywhere, all over their floor. I mean, it was like one of those. And Michelle looks at me like, what did you just do? And I'm like, I just thought, But I remember like thinking this thought of like, oh, your little body was perfect in the sense of you had never had anything, any sugary anything put in. And I just broke the seal,
You decimated the temple, Jeremy.
Right.
Yeah. You destroyed a beautiful work of art.
That's not a healthy way of thinking about how to raise a kid. You know what I mean? Like, because then you just like, it invites feelings of shame or regret or, oh, you were this and now you're not. And I would just say, I don't think that's the goal. I think the goal is to say, I want to perfectly be an image of the God inside of me. And that's a goal every day to say, how do I, as best as I can, allow the fruits of the Spirit to be evident in my life today? Right. That's the goal. And perfection is an illusion unless you're Jesus. And we're not capable of that. Like we sin, we make mistakes, and every other person shy of Jesus has chosen that. And we didn't have to, but we do. And I think that's, the world we're created into. And yet God indwells inside of us, even though we're not perfect. And that to me is the more astounding part of that.
Paul's view, as I understand it, is like because we're all sinful, we're all deserving of punishment until we're washed in the blood, and then the blood makes us perfect again. Right. But and then, of course, like the way I was brought up was it only works if you accept it. But then you as a universalist would say like all of us are made perfect by the blood, like whether we accept it in this life or not. Is that right?
Well, we're getting a little into atonement theory and, your view of eternity as well. So I would say from an atonement theory point of view, the fact that we've all sinned puts all of us into a predicament with Satan, because now he's got a claim to all of us. Because like, oh, you guys broke the agreement. You had this perfect God and you guys disobeyed that God and did your own thing. And now I have claim to, you within this creation. And so God, on behalf of all of us, is like, all right, all of you have this predicament, not because of original sin, because you all have chosen the same thing. And so I'm going to solve this problem. But then, whether or not you choose it now, I think, all of us are on a trajectory to understanding that and embracing that. And at some point, whether it's in this life or after this life, I believe Jesus will help us each see it more clearly.
One more just kind of random note. When you were talking about why does Paul mention Adam, not Eve? So it made me think, what's that part? What's the Bible verse where the woman was deceived first and it's all her fault? So 1 Timothy 2, and that's kind of the infamous, I do not permit a woman to speak in church. She should be quiet and stuff because it's all her fault and she can only be saved through childbearing. One of the most garbage things Paul has said, in my opinion, but we can talk about that at a different season.
We should just quote Romans 5 back to Paul and Timothy, right? Because like, no, Paul, she didn't even show up in your retelling of this story in Romans 5. How is all of a sudden she's the focus now?
Paul's a little bit of a postmodern, non-literal Bible believer in this way, right? Is like he can just make the Old Testament mean whatever he wants it to by the way he retells the story.
But in all seriousness, I think that's a really good point. You have Paul in two different retellings of this story, singling out two different people. In 1 Timothy, it's Eve. In Romans 5, it's Adam. Well, which is it? Like how, this is Paul trying to make other points, right? Not a literal retelling. And so you take all of these kind of passages and you have to make a theological answer for all of these that makes sense. And ultimately you do that through Jesus, through going, okay, Jesus, how do we make sense of all these things that Paul is saying? Because, Romans 5, he's all mad at Adam, and Timothy's all mad at Eve. Like, what's going on here?
Yeah. Who's really at fault here?
Who's really to blame?
So if you don't want to call it original sin, it seems like clear that Paul is saying, like, because of Adam's sin, we're under the curse, right? Like we would have had perfect immortal bodies without the sin. Do you agree with Paul in that kind of understanding of the curse, the fall of man, that kind of thing?
Yeah, but I also think it's kind of like a weird hypothetical. Like, I don't think Adam's a real person. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so I don't think
you're right. So what does that mean then?
Well, that's what I'm saying. There's got to be something else here. Like, we want to make it real clean cut of like Adam did this. Like, well, I don't even think there was an Adam. And, Adam was the Hebrew word for dirt, which is how God made people. I mean, it's like all of this is storytelling. Like, people get so caught up on this stuff and they miss the bigger point of this, which is Paul trying to describe Jesus. That's the bigger point of this. And so I would say, yeah, in theory, humanity is made in this image of God. We were made to literally be the little temples of God on this earth. So yeah, that was the design to be perfect. But because we decided we know best, we'll do our own thing, we'll go our own way. Yeah, now there's this sin problem. And call it a curse, call whatever you want to call it. Like, yeah, we chose sin. And now we have a debt to pay with the forces of evil that now are making a claim on us. And God's like, all right, now I got to do something about this because we've got a cosmic problem here. And so God's like, all right, I'll rectify this. I will die on behalf of my image bearers. And that was how I'll redeem them back.
I do like that worldview better in the sense of it takes on more personal responsibility, right? It's not, you can't just blame our ancestors for all the world's problems. Because that's, if you are kind of a literal 6-day creationist who believes in the literal Garden of Eden, forbidden fruit story, it always felt like a little bit illogical to me of like, why are we all suffering the consequences of someone else's sin? Like, that doesn't really seem fair.
Sure.
So,
and again,
yeah.
I can say, no, I don't think original sin is a thing. I also think there is something, sin has effect on other people. And I even think there are, there's generational sin, which is, if you have a sin that gets passed down, it gets passed down not in the way we think of original sin being passed down. It gets passed down. We see something and it becomes normalized and we're more likely to choose it. And then we do choose, and a lot of families have generational sin where, one generation just literally teaches the next generation to sin the same way they did. And it takes someone being willing to say, yeah, I know this is how my parents are, but I don't want to be that. And I don't want to keep doing that. And sometimes you got to be that person that says, I'm not going to keep this generational sin going anymore. It ends with me and, making those kind of decisions. And so I do think there are generational sins that you see this and all of that plays into it. But it is not this magical, there was this guy named Adam and he made one bad choice and now you are born into, shame and filth. It's like, no, you're born in being the image of God. And yet every human on earth minus one has chosen to make bad choices.
Yeah. I do see how it's a useful metaphor. That was something I was thinking about too, of like how do we use original sin kind of as a more metaphorical concept? Like when we talk about historically slavery as America's original sin, and they don't mean it's like this magical curse like in the Bible, but they mean like even though we don't own slaves today, we're still feeling the socio-political ramifications of what our country was founded on. So
totally. And that's a very generational sin, right? That was passed on and normalized and argued for, and we're still trying to unravel that one.
Right. Exactly. All right, great. Do you feel like you answered Greg's questions?
I don't know. Greg will have to tell us.
I know. Yeah. We appreciate you writing in, Greg. We'd love to hear from more people as well. Cool. I think we got through it. Do you feel good, Jeremy?
That was a doozy.
Do you remember your homework?
Pig.
It's my pig.
I gotta go watch.
You can either watch Pig or you can listen to Bob Dylan.
So I gotta choose Nicolas Cage or Bob Dylan. Those are my options.
Yeah. Either way, you're getting the voice of a generation. So it's a win-win.
Oh gosh. On that note.
All right. On that note,
play the music. Let's get out of here.
Let's ease our way off the stage. Thanks for listening, everybody. Please do write us. please do write us and give us your movie and music recommendations and let us know what you think about the show. Maybe even give us a rating. Those are nice. All right, and we will be in Chapter 6 next week.